Oh, look, there I am. And with us today is Eve Jakes.
Hey,
Excuse me, Evan Jakes. My brain is really scrambling.
that's all right. Your brain's obviously in the past decade or something like that. We're fine.
Hold on. Let's see. First, we'll do that. And then we will hope the sound works. Hold on. Let's see. First, we'll do that. I think I did it.
Yeah, well done.
Wait, did I do? Oh, geez, I did it. I did it. Okay. I'm learning so many things
Oh,
lately.
well
My neurons are really buzzing, let's say
Cool.
buzzing. So I'm going to see if there's a way for me to see you better. Maybe there's not.
What are you saying at the moment?
I'm looking at the StreamYard, the StreamYard. I can
Gestalt
see myself
entity.
very small. I was hoping that maybe I could see both of us larger, but maybe I can't.
I've got like both of us side by side like that.
I've got all of these extra controls. That might be why.
Oh, well, I'm not doing anything very interesting. I guess it's harder to read my lips when I'm talking if you can't see me, though.
I think that when we were using Zoom, I don't know what day that was, but it wasn't that long ago. It was within the last few weeks. When we were using Zoom, I was able to really anchor myself to the conversation we were having because your face and my face were large on the screen. And so I used my brain to interact with people. But now most of my screen is not people. Most of my screen is toggles and options, and there's a little chat thing. And I think that's okay. It just wasn't what I expected, and so I'm getting used to it.
All right.
I'm getting used to it. Whoa. A lot has happened.
Has it?
Yeah, a lot has happened. We got the episode with the chat of yours and mine last time has been published. It's up at intuitive.pub/text, and other episodes have been published since then. So I'm using the tool sets. I'm using the infrastructure that has been built. It is so hard for me to do. It's very difficult to remember how it went or what I did with it, but it is possible. It's happening, and I have to thank you again for helping me organize those points the last time that we talked, because the points, they've really stuck in my mind in a way that they hadn't been previously. I think I might even recall them now.
Oh.
Let's see. We need community so that any one person is not overburdened by trying to save the day. We need to prioritize intuitive listening so that we're repairing our brain needs and actually understanding one another. And people who aren't getting paid for their real non-capitalism based expertise really need to be paid.
Yes.
3 points. 3 points. And I remember those 3 points because of the conversation that I had with you.
Hooray! Well done. Fantastic.
And another thing that I have to remember to do is hit that button, because I didn't hit that button. I have a really hacked together broadcast room now.
Ooh.
Sorry, you started to say something, and then I said something at the same time.
Well, I was just going to ask what we were talking about, but then you started talking about your broadcast room. So do you want to tell us about your broadcast room?
Well, sure. I'm going to open this.
I was just going to ask what we were talking about, but then you started talking about your broadcast.
Hold on, sorry. See, now I can see our faces, at least sort of, if I keep this open, but it won't broadcast as well.
It sounds like there's a huge delay on the audio now.
Oh, yeah. So StreamYard doesn't have, it seems weird that it wouldn't have a large version of the screen, but it doesn't look like it does. And that's okay, because it does things that Zoom does not do. I just can't see, I can't see what we're broadcasting as well.
Hmm.
I can see it on the delay. Wild. This whole thing is wild. Well, what is your earliest memory? Evan Jakes, what is your earliest memory of me talking about broadcasting, me building broadcasting infrastructure, me having a broadcast room? What do you might remember more than me about some parts of how this began?
I remember you asking me if I wanted to be on the radio with you, and I thought you were
Yeah, we
just
talked
like,
about that last time too.
yeah. I didn't understand what you meant at first because I didn't realize you meant internet radio. So I was thinking, there's no way we're going to get it together to go to a radio broadcasting station and be on the radio. And here you are in your radio broadcasting station being on the radio.
Well, yeah, I guess we kind of are. It's interesting how organizations that used to have a lot more media privilege and media leverage are more and more, especially recently, needing to interact with people in communities on the level at which people in communities have media privilege or media leverage. There are a lot of people with otherwise expensive systems that are now piping those systems to the, how do I say, more basic tool sets that a consumer level tool sets, but it's more than that. It's not just consumer level. It's where people have entry points into broadcasting video or audio or publishing for free, which are increasing. People have more and more access to that, but now there are swanky media organizations that are visiting us on that turf, and they're having to learn how to use those tools in a way that is not hugely dissimilar from the everyday person who can learn how to use those tools. So there's something about the landscape is happening. So over some number of years since I first started talking to you about the radio, I have been struggling through a lot of death and dismemberment. Sure. My poor dismembered guts. I don't know if that's exactly accurate as I would like to be, but it's been bad. It's very bad. And the tool sets that I learned to use as a media professional when it came to broadcasting or performing or publishing, many of those tools turned out to no longer be accessible to me if I was disabled. And I didn't know that when I started learning them. I didn't know that the businesses producing really neat broadcasting and publishing tool sets were unaware of those tool sets not being possible to use by the people who have the best things to say, have the most relevant life experience. I don't know if everybody would agree with me on this course, but it's been kind of weird. Can you sort of help me? Can you reflect a bit? This is really interesting because my memory is different when I'm not watching our faces in real time.
Interesting.
Because that's how I taught my brain to do it. And so hanging on to the thread that I'm describing is very challenging, but this is just a different way of doing it.
That's, if I understand it rightly, that's part of how you're disabled in using media, isn't it? Like, part of it is that things like Facebook are actually painful for you to be on because of like the visuals. But also part of it is that you need to be able to focus and understand what you're doing in order to function on any platform. And
Yeah.
not every platform is conducive to that if you have any kind of brain troubles, which a lot of people do.
Sure. And not everybody knows how big a difference it can make whether you have your head in the EMF or whether you're able to get your head out of the EMF.
Oh, right, yeah.
And a huge part of building a studio I could broadcast from has been giving myself options in regards to getting out of the EMF. So I won't try to show you now, although it would be so cool if I could, but I don't think I can this moment. But I have my keyboard, and anything that I need to use needs to be able to pull away from the computer. So the computer's up here on its own sort of minimalist, mobile, hacked together platform stand. It's about standing height. And then this right here is separate. Because the only way that I have a chance of using the computer for a few minutes at a time, most of the time, I make compromises to get on the live stream, which has been interesting, but most of the time I have to keep 7 to 10 feet between me and the computer. So I'm back there. So I usually push this bench back and I bring this back with me, and I'm much further from the computer, but it gets me out of the worst radius of the EMF coming from the computer. And then I have a slim little chance that I can turn the Wi-Fi on my phone to do something from back in that corner. There are a lot of things that are like that I don't know where or how other people talk about things like this, or if, I mean, there are people out there who had to figure out how to use their equipment when the EMF is killing them, right? They're out there somewhere. I just don't know who they are.
I would imagine most people would just give up, wouldn't they?
I feel demoralized thinking about just kind of making that statement and using the words "most people."
Sorry.
Do we do that? I said, no, don't apologize. I think I'm afraid it might be true. Do most people give up? My heart hurts. Do most people give up? Or just on that, do you think?
I didn't mean they would give up on life. I meant they would give up on trying to engage with the internet, which for some people might be the same thing, of course.
For me, it was the same thing.
Yeah.
I didn't want it to be the same thing, but it turned out to be the same thing, because the only skills that I had a chance of using to communicate effectively, they all required me to use computer type things and digital devices, because I had been spending a lot of years developing my career in those spaces. And when my brain was in greatest danger, those were the skill sets that I had to grasp at. And if I had not done any of those things, I don't think I had really any way to communicate. I think 80 to 90% of my ability to communicate would have been gone if I had given up on the technology. And then the people I found and the different kinds of support that I found, I would not have found, and so I would have been dead many times over, because I found them using those skill sets from studying design and web development and various kinds of tech and business and marketing and performance and media.
Right. And it's very well established that at this stage in our society, if someone is desperate, they either beg on the streets or they go on the internet. And if people are disabled from going on the internet to meet their needs, they're probably also disabled from going on the streets to meet their needs. So what do? They
blow their noses. That's what I think they do.
Sorry?
That might not be right.
No, I literally didn't hear you.
Oh. I said they blow their noses.
Hooray for non-sequiturs.
Blew my nose, right.
Let's blow our noses of this entire society. Well, no, just the bad bits, actually. Let's not blow our noses of the entire society, because lots of bits of it are fantastic.
I don't know if in my previous life I had thought much at all about people who couldn't be on the streets. I had this idea, I'm a little shaky on this, but this is what I think is going on. We'll find out as I talk through my mouth. I think that my concept was that people become homeless and that's terrible and we don't want it to happen, but we, as a culture, as any group in our culture, we don't know what to do about it. So people end up on the streets and then we try to help them however we can. But I don't think I ever thought about or understood that some people could not make it to the streets, could not make it to homelessness, because homelessness itself would either kill them or expose them to such terrible physical traumatization that there's no, they don't, so we never hear about, they're not the homeless people that we help. Who are they? And I don't think I had any idea about that before a number of different interesting things happened to me over some years.
No, I didn't either. It's not the boogeyman that we grow up with, is it? You know, if you don't do your work, then your parents say, well, do you want to live in a cardboard box when you grow up? Which of course sounds really cool, which defeats the object. But you don't, it is invisible, the whole tranche of people who are just stuck in rooms trying to survive with nothing because they can't interact or earn money in the normal ways. It's not visible. It's not what we think of as a person in trouble being. That wasn't very clear, was it?
Oh, I'm kind of turning it over in my head. Please, can you continue? Do you have more that you can say about it? Maybe it will gel.
You've disappeared, but I can still hear you. So
there are exciting toggles on this thing that let me change the screen while we're talking.
Oh, okay, so, great.
Practicing.
All right. It's not something that people are prepared for as a thing that might happen in their lives. I think most of us, especially most of us with any kind of brain difference, have thought growing up, what if I did become homeless? How would I survive? Where would I live? What would I eat? Like, what would I do as a homeless person? And had probably a whole idea worked out, you know, would we get a dog? How would we beg? And all of this kind of thing. But we haven't thought, like, what if I'm trapped in a room with a chronic illness, unable to interact with the outside world? What will I do then?
Yeah. I think that one of the things that's happening is not only the EMF exposure, it's also that when I think back to a time before all of these experiences, I'm coming up with nothing or very little. It's kind of hard to say, but like I'm going back into a previous brain and I'm saying, well, what did I know about this? How did I understand this? And as of this moment, I guess I'm coming up with nothing. And that's really interesting because I had a lot of interactions with others in regards to my desire to help people who were at the most vulnerable points people get to. I had a number of interactions with others about where do we integrate understanding of and action in regards to homelessness. My dad has been disabled and then severely disabled for basically my whole life. When I was a young kid, he was working, but then there was a point. I'm not sure exactly how old I was, but I wasn't very old when he stopped having to work. And even our family understandings of disability were so limited. I think the consensus is they were limited because disabled people in general do not have support that people who are not disabled and families who are not disabled and communities who are not disabled take for granted. And as a result, we've been so stressed that, well, we've been so stressed, and then I discovered that I had been being poisoned for a large portion of my life by environmental contaminants that we were told were safe, and we didn't know anything about the genetic difference that 1 in 4 people or so can't detoxify those contaminants. So my experiences of being roofied earlier in my life, which I never called being roofied, that really changed my sense of a lot of things that have happened over the course of my life. But I was really shocked to find out that we had never developed a robust enough understanding of how to support disabled people with disability in our family because of so much terrible stress and trauma that has happened to basically everybody, not just in my family, but everywhere. People are realizing what they have actually had to deal with in their lives. And so when I became suddenly terribly disabled, and I don't know at what point you say severely, but wow, it was really extreme from early on, when I came down with severe environmental illness at the end of 2013. It wasn't that bad at the end of 2013 in comparison to what it became shortly thereafter. In the next few years thereafter, certainly. I had this weird idea that we knew what disability was in my family because some of our family members were disabled. And then I found out that what we knew about disability was not, it wasn't sufficient for me to survive, but I couldn't just die politely and quietly. It wasn't sufficient knowledge about severe disability to keep people from rampantly misinterpreting me when I would ask for my needs to be met, so that I wouldn't end up screaming and begging and incoherently struggling to get my needs met in a way that turned me into a terrible monster that other people didn't want to deal with. So disability wouldn't have just killed me quietly. Disability would have made me into an alarm clarion that never stopped sounding, like if the fire alarm goes off in your house and you can't reach it, and it just keeps shrinking at you day after day after day after day after day. I'm looking at the fire alarm thing that has traumatized me a few times that I can't reach, so it's not up there. Anyway, there's this big blank part of my brain that I thought had the job of understanding that there are disabled people in the world and there are people in hardship and they need our help and we all need to help each other. And I am still a little shocked to try and think back on that time and realize that I didn't have a concept of that. And we all really need to have a concept of that if we are to avoid the wasting of living beings, of human life.
Yes, I think, well, a few things that you said really joined up for me. Starting with, obviously, I don't know your dad really at all, but in general, older disabled people, and especially older, like professional class disabled men, are like, well, I'm not gonna be a burden on anyone. Just bloody get on with it. Sorry, I don't know if that was even clear. I was accidentally doing an impression of an old professional class disabled British man, and it was probably completely incoherent.
No,
but
my dad has approached his disabled circumstances with doing the best he can and having a full, courageous heart and doing his best not to lay what he perceives as his burdens on other people. And when I have talked to him about that, I have learned a lot more about how my grandfather, my father's father, he was very sick towards the end of his life, and the people around him seemed to say, if only we had known what he was going through. He was so beloved, he would have had more help, he would have had more support. But it's still a point of honor that he didn't tell people what was going on. And in that time, I don't know if there was even a way for him to do it, and maybe he wouldn't have known how to do it, but he didn't really tell people what was happening for him. And I think family has said that we think that my grandmother knew some things, but maybe, you know, it was supposed to be hush hush. I think that there was a concern that as a businessman, people wouldn't interact with his business. He wouldn't have any income if people found out that he was sick. And so I absolutely understand why my dad would move through some of those steps. And the way that this has happened for me, it is so clear that my dad should have had more support my whole life, and I had no idea what disability was doing just to the people around me who didn't have a language with which to speak about it. And so having a broadcast room, having a community radio that addresses these things compassionately and inclusively, and makes sure that people have a means of talking about things that are challenging to understand, is really part of that for me, because I couldn't survive doing what my dad and grandpa did. I could not stay more quiet about what my needs are. I keep being driven into screaming like the fire alarm, because literally fire alarms are needed, but not in the same way if we restore community media privilege. Then one person in isolated circumstances here and there and all over the place doesn't have to be the alarm clarion. We can be having a public conversation about how some people are severely disabled in ways that they need help long before they reach homelessness, or else the terrible results to all our communities, and we're living that apocalypse.
Yes, I think what I realized from what you were saying is that a couple of generations ago, maybe one generation ago, you would have died politely and quietly, or you would have been the mad one in the attic, because the ethos was not to bother people with your problems. And the men would be strong and upstanding and die with their boots on, and the women would fade away angelically and say something beautiful about heaven. And that's what you were expected to do. And that is literally that was the expectation. There was a culture around illness of this kind, and it was to die well.
I think what I'm uncomfortable with is the use of the past tense. That's what I have done too.
Yeah.
Before, not even that long ago. And like, I keep forgetting, because trauma can wipe out your brain, so you don't remember anything over and over and over. And I have caught myself doing it long since. I should have known better. And the past tense is what I thought. That's what I thought about these things. I thought we used to do those things. We don't do them anymore. And then I'll just say it this way. It's not exactly the same, and then they all happened to me. And I tried to tell the people around me, we're not supposed to do this to people. We're not supposed to let this happen to people. And what I found was that there were these embedded professional, embedded professional templates that are currently in use in our culture to deal with extreme circumstances that we happen to know from having documented it now, make a lot of those extreme circumstances worse, and then place the blame on the people who, if we listen to them, we could actually sort it out. That was kind of tangled and complicated. Do you know what I said?
I might have lost the thread a little bit. I don't think that's your fault. I was doing that thing where one person's talking and the other person's thinking about what they're going to say, which is a bad idea that I shouldn't have been doing.
That happens to me too.
Oh, good. I'm glad it's not just me. Well, I think you were saying that this kind of ethos that people who are sick in a way that is tremendously difficult for those around them should die politely is still here now, even though the culture around it has supposedly changed because we're now in like a millennial world where people can say, I'm having problems, please help me. We don't have the structures in place that when somebody is saying, no, I'm having really, really, really bad problems all the time, please help me lots and lots all the time or I'll die. People can actually deliver that, because it takes a lot more than wanting to.
So I think I could stay in this part of the conversation for basically ever, I think. And I think that a really good place for me to move to from that point is that when we are sharing privileges with one another that are about making media and having public conversations and having more of the kind of media privilege that I guess we came to assume that only those people should have, which was never my thing because I went into that as careers. So that, you know, I always thought I am learning these things. This is my kind of space. This is familiar to me. And I was mostly interacting with people who understood media spaces, but lots of people think media is something that other people make. We don't know how to do that. We're not journalists. We're not YouTubers. We're not this or that. But when you help people to notice where certain kinds of technology and tool sets make it very easy for them to have media privilege and to hold public conversations and to share information and resources that are life-saving, they don't need to leave it to people they don't know and can't reach. They can do it themselves. And so when the apocalypse is reaching more and more people, it's so helpful for them to know that they could have some more media privilege than they had, because then they don't have to die quietly. They could actually reach out and get help. And I keep thinking of the zombie movies with the one remaining person with the whatever short range radio or walkie talkie thing, short range radio probably. I don't know what those things are. I'm thinking about I Am Legend with Will Smith and the German Shepherd. But it, you know, like every zombie movie where somebody finds a radio and manages to send something out on the radio every morning at the same time and hopes that someone will hear them and maybe someone will have a radio and will be able to respond. That is hugely what we've been doing now for years. And I'm not sure since when. So like, I guess since 2015 maybe is radio stuff, but I'm not sure. We were doing podcasting before that. When we have awareness of the media privilege that is possible, we can get our needs met instead of assuming that we have to die. I mean, that's pretty basic.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that I have broadcast infrastructure. It's weird really feeling in my body. Like I used to watch movies about post-apocalyptic landscapes where you would find a dusty, a sort of dusty, destroyed town with one building and one person, I think usually it was a dude, in the middle of a ton of old electronics, just fixing whatever he can fix. I think the movies that I saw with that, it tended to be a dude. But I always really thought that was a grand kind of endeavor and an important job. And I was so glad that some person in whatever apocalypse story was doing that so that the protagonist could find them and find in the Book of Eli, which is a movie that's great. In the Book of Eli, I think he needed a charge cable. He was hanging on to the music on a really old iPod or something with one of the round rotary things on the front. I don't remember what that's called. It's like a rotary touchscreen thing. And if not for the people who try to keep the tech working during an apocalypse, then there are a lot of stories that can't happen. The protagonist would be dead. And so here I am, and like, I don't know what this looks like to other people, but it's gone through so many iterations of all of these wires and half-broken electronics, and every time I manage to broadcast, almost every time I'm using a different combination of half-broken electronics that I have managed to Frankenstein, like stitch together and get them to put something on the internet. And how is it that I'm living that person's life? How is it that that's happening? I think that's pretty astonishing, but I think a lot of people are finding themselves in positions like that. It's just me and a bunch of other people were recognizing it some years before the coronavirus brought the apocalypse into stark clarity.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you're framing it like that, because you've always had a very metafictional way of framing things. You know, you see the ways that reality and fiction interact, and you like to frame things as stories because it makes a difference. It a lot of the time when you're talking about things being apocalyptic, you're also framing yourself and others as heroes in a movie, in an action movie. And so you're not just saying, oh no, everything's really, really bad. You're saying, and we're heroes. And that's the silent part that people often don't hear when you're saying that.
That's something else that's really weird to me that I would love to talk about at some point, because I feel, and I think a lot of people feel, that we really need the stories in order to survive the real life circumstances, much like Eli in that movie needs his music in order to survive his circumstances. So he finds, I don't remember what happens, and maybe I'll watch it again. There are a lot of apocalypse stories where somebody is hanging on to a lone an iPod or something, some little music playing device that is the last one that anybody's seen for a while or something like that. And it seems that, wow, I couldn't do that a few months ago. I don't know if I could do that a month ago. It seems that without a grasp of our stories, we may not be able to learn how to become a successful protagonist in one of our stories. And there are so many stories in the world that I have felt strengthened me to act in the ways that were needed. Whereas I see people really absorbed in stories that they're being offered by the entertainment industry, but by a lot of different people and places. And they do not seem to have gotten to the point where they say, I must act, I must be brave, like the person in this story, I must be clever, like the person in this story. They haven't crossed that threshold yet, but people whose lives are being threatened in very acute and extreme ways seem to be able to recognize that they have already learned something from the stories they've been absorbing, and so they can move into that, they can recognize that. And I guess it may simply be that many people haven't experienced enough extremity for their body to say, okay, now it's time to be the people in the stories, because what are we going to do if we're not the people in the stories? Maybe you have to actually have your life really threatened, or someone close to you have their life really threatened. But stories are so crucial, and I think that many people who are afraid of how they should act in extremity, and so they don't do anything, they don't say anything, they are silent, we wonder where they went, we don't know if they're okay, because they just can't interact with something this extreme. It would be helpful if we could use our new radio infrastructure to help those people understand that there's a very good chance that they have understandings subconsciously that are ready to kick into gear if they are courageous enough to confront the real circumstances that we are all kind of waiting around in. And I hope that that's the case. And I feel as if it may be the case that if we can recognize this together, and it's a collaborative conversation, and we believe in ourselves and in one another, and we remind ourselves of the stories that we remember, we might know a lot more about how to get through this together than we ever previously surmised.
Yes, I think so. I think that sometimes people genuinely don't get inspired by stories and just see them as entertainment. And I think that can be just people being like that, or it can be people being very rational and going, oh, but that's fiction, so of course it's not going to be like reality. But I also think that a lot of people want to be like someone in a story and are trying, and you just can't see it. Just because someone who appears to be scared may be very desperate to be exactly like their favorite hero, and they just aren't managing to show it in a way that you can see.
A lot of people are having to rise to heroic occasions completely invisibly. A lot of people are having to rise to heroic occasions in ways where it looks like they're managing, and people will assume that they're managing, and yet they may have no opportunity or have no language with which to talk about what's actually happening for them. And that is the case with every single person, basically anywhere, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good note to end on.
All right.
I'm pleased that this seems to be working and StreamYard seems to be working. And I had another question for you, but I'm gonna try something. Hold on a minute.
Okay.
I'm getting better at the buttons, but I'm still slow at the buttons.
Oh, well done. No worries.
I think I did it right. So the one thing that I want to talk about before we go is how at the beginning of our conversation, I accidentally called you Eve. And I wondered if you would like to comment on that, because there are a lot of people newly navigating people in their lives whose names have changed or whose gender pronouns are different than expected or something like that. And I love to model what we can of how we handle those interactions, so that others who aren't familiar might also be able to feel better. I don't want to get, there's a part of me that goes, oh no, I used the wrong name for somebody, and it is a clenching up and what does this mean for the other person? And I'm pretty sure that respectfully asking the other person what it means for them is usually the most appropriate approach, and I would love your insights on it.
Thank you. Okay, well, just to make it clear for anyone listening, Eve is my birth name. I'm non-binary, so I go by Evan now. And you knew me as Eve originally, and so, you know, sometimes people forget, which is what happened there. So if you are the person who forgot, and if somebody in your life has just changed their name or their pronouns, you are going to forget, no matter how much you love them and no matter how valid you think they are and no matter how hard you are trying, you're going to get it wrong sometimes because your brain knows them as whatever they were. It's okay to forget sometimes, and if they aren't expecting it now, they very soon will be, because it happens. Just say, oh no, I'm sorry, and say the right name. And just...
I'm trying to remember if that's what I did. I think I probably did.
Yeah, you know, you don't have to make a huge deal of it as long as you like emanate, I'm sorry, I failed to say your correct name, which is yours, which describes you, you know, then it's fine. I mean, I think it probably depends on the person and like how bad their dysphoria is. Dysphoria, I can't even say it. But for me, I'm not that upset if somebody gets my name wrong. I'll just go, oh, you know, whoops. But how do I say this? It's very, very different from somebody doing it maliciously. Like, I know someone who is constantly dead named by his best friend's mother. And, hang on, cannot go round their house because of all the dead naming. And it's not an accident, it's because she doesn't believe that he's valid. So, and that is a very, 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 very different experience, and we can tell the difference. Yeah. You know, we don't think that you're going, ooh, you have a silly name that I will not say because it's too silly. You know, we know it's not that, hopefully. I don't know if I've explained very well. I think
it's wonderful. It helps me a lot. Also because, so I've had conversations like these a zillion times, and then my neurons get wiped out from brain death over and over and over and over again. And I notice when I've been, I don't know how to say it, it's like all of the neurons are just like gone. They're like a wildfire has just burned all the way through and they're just gone. But then what's left are the most basic little ideas and memories from which I can rebuild a lot of what happened, just by healing my own body and by looking at my documentation or talking to other people and remembering stuff that has happened. And I have noticed repeatedly that not only with you, but with others whose names have changed since I knew them, when I get wiped out like that, it's like I get reset to the names that people had when I originally met them. And that's been fairly consistent through all of this repeating brain damage. It's really interesting to me. So I thought that would all be kind of worth exploring for a few minutes before we wrapped up.
That is interesting. And of course, you've had quite a few name changes yourself, haven't you?
Well, when you get killed over and over again, but your body is still walking around and people try to call you the name of the person who died when they don't notice that that person died, it feels really weird to me. And I've hung on to names, like I've hung on to the name Max, because if I really change my name as often as I feel like I'm a completely new person, I don't know how much headway I'd be making in communicating with others. I don't know, maybe I'd be doing better, possibly. But I noticed that there's a huge relief in using a different name, because how many ways do we have to communicate with other people that the person they knew, something happened to the person that they knew, something harmed the person they knew, something changed the person they knew. In my case, the person that others knew was allowed to die over and over again, was allowed to be tortured to death over and over and over again. And that is entirely invisible if I don't use a different name and say, hey, quit calling me Megan Elizabeth Morris, because when you call me Megan Elizabeth Morris, but you fail to acknowledge how Megan Elizabeth Morris died, something is really wrong here.
I see what you mean.
Me being able to reclaim my own names, to bring the pieces of myself back and put them together again, it requires me to have some way of asking others to respect the experiences that I've had and what I've been through. And changing my name has seemed like a really necessary part of that I could not accomplish certain things unless I used a different name.
Yes, that's actually very clear. Like, because your neurology has been repeatedly destroyed and rebuilt because you weren't getting your needs met. And if people think that you're still the same person, then they have missed the severity of how badly you weren't getting your needs met and what that did to your neurology and what that means vis-a-vis the person they're now talking to. So making them call you a different name is, insofar as they're able to understand that, is making them remember that.
Yeah, and for me, when I am constantly under threat of mortal poisoning, if I never know when my toxic load in my body is going to be too much for my body to be able to survive, I need really straightforward cues from other people about whether I'm safe with them. And one of the things that other people, that people who knew me before I was Max, that those people can do to make sure that they are aware of the ways that I can be most safe with them. If they call me Max, I know they've gotten at least some of these communications. And if they call me by the previous name, there's a chance that they won't protect me from what killed her.
I see.
My big points. And I know that it's not the same for everybody, but my experience has been so extreme that having reminders and accessible conversations about the different experiences people have that cause them to change their names or present in different ways, that's so important to me. A lot of people are dying and coming to terrible harm just because people don't understand how they're expressing themselves. And many of them, they're expressing themselves differently because of trauma that is not being addressed in their environments, whether it's one kind or another. Thanks for helping me unravel more of the conversation.
You're very welcome. Thank you. So
we've been broadcasting for 1 hour and 4 minutes, and now it is 9 seconds. So I think I know what to do to add this to our content streams most expediently, and I'm going to try and do it.
Fantastic. Well, good luck, and thank you for this excellent conversation. I don't know how to stop being on the screen.
No, it's okay. What will be, let's see, how will I do it? I would have an outro or something. For instance, I would say, thank you so much for listening to this Intuitive Public Radio broadcast. Find out more about what we are working on by navigating your web browsers to intuitive.pub/radio. But that wasn't bad.
That was great.
Thanks.